Welcome to the We Hack Purple podcast, where each episode we meet a new person who is part of the information security field, but usually, quite frankly, AppSec. I just want to talk about application security. I'm Tanya Janca. I am your host as usual. But today I have Frank from Phoenix Security, and our sponsor is Phoenix Security. So,
What a
Frank,
coincidence.
will you please introduce yourself, Frank?
I'm Frank, or Francesco Cipollone, as my mom used to call me. Frank for friends. I've been in security for quite a long time and doing a lot of different things. I started a career as developer, then moved into infrastructure security when it was still uncool and you had to still configure server and other stuff, and then moved slowly and gradually to the cloud from the very early days when it was really ugly to configure Azure and other stuff. And cloud security and back all full force in application security, and then trying to combine the two. So here we are talking about AppSec once again.
Yes. So Frank and I have been friends for quite a while. And oh yeah, and I'm Tanya Janca. I'm very bad at remembering to tell people who I am. I'm the host. I'm old news. You all already know me. So Frank and I were talking and he said he wrote a white paper. And I was like, tell me more. And then we were talking about it. And then it was like, well, what if you just came on the podcast and told people about it? Because so you first, like, you wrote a white paper. White papers are hard to write, but somehow you managed to get all these different people from the community to. So can you tell us about how you did that?
Exactly. I think every time I put something together, I think wouldn't be so cool if somebody write a section of it. And there is a good part and a bad part. Let me start with the good part, that you get a lot of different perspective on a white paper and a piece of paper. And the bad part is that it grows inorganically, and you need to a little bit of govern and create a single voice on the white paper, because otherwise it's just a bunch of sticked up article and section. But it's really cool because, especially right now, I think we are at the cusp of something different. We are seeing application security really flourishing, and application security and cloud security with a fantastic discussion around contextualization, or how we can do really application security better, because just fixing consistently stuff doesn't work anymore. And that fundamentally sparked the discussion of, all right, so how do we do better vulnerability management on application security? But most importantly, how do we manage and measure progress? And all of a sudden, all us in application security, we just said, we need to be the best, and everybody needs to be the best. And having that conversation, slowly but surely we realize, but not everybody's at the same level of application security, at the maturity level. There is a maturity scale, and not all the measurements are actually fit for purpose. So we said, okay, now we need to write something. We need to write about maturity and different level of maturity, and what works at the early days and it doesn't work at the later days, and vice versa. And then we start seeing some patterns, because we start saying, okay, how do we measure how to fix stuff? SLAs. It's the most things that's or service level agreement, that in security is how long do you have to actually fix something? And then we start thinking, well, as AppSec has this measurement, also operational security has this measurement. And what is the difference? And then we start debating, okay, maybe there are some consistencies. So let's add also operational security into the mix, because it's still part of the same vulnerability management lifecycle. And something that became 7 bullet points on a piece of paper and a lot of ideas turned up into a 40 pages book. And that's the good and the bad part, I guess, on the white paper. But it took us 8 or 9 months to put it together, because we wrote it, we rewrote it, we divided in 3 sections to actually govern all this mass of knowledge that start growing. But in the end, we managed to put it all on paper in a coherent form and in a flowing form that I think I'm really proud of, because it's really hard to write collectively and collaboratively. But most importantly, writing about a subject that is so complex and has so many faceting and areas that you could get it wrong.
I feel like working with other people when you create is kind of wonderful because they have all these great ideas and different experiences that they can share. But I also find it kind of awful because I'm like, why is this taking 5 times as long?
Yeah, and open source and writing and dedicating our own time, you can't be really strict on things, or you can, but you can't. You need to be subtle and like, please, please, please get this reviewed. We need to get it out.
Yes.
And it's free
Okay, so
time.
you manage service level agreements, or you talked about service level agreements, SLAs. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think you might agree. Like us security folks will say, you said, the SLA says this will be fixed in 3 days, blah, blah, blah. But then when it's us being on time with stuff, we're not as good sometimes.
Right. We're not scalable. I think we're not scalable. And I think the conclusion that we reached when we were talking about SLA was, we detect something, but we don't know the impact of that tic-tac. So we say, you shall fix things in X amount of days, but not all those things are actually the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in operational security, we get it a little bit easier, quote unquote easier, air quote for who is listening,
Mm-hmm.
where the ripple effect of applying a patch could be straightforward, could also be disastrous when you switch a framework, when you upgrade Apache, for example, or you swap virtual machine from Java version to another Java. So it could be quite destructive, but most of the time it's kind of governed, it's kind of well tested. Now, in software security, it's a wild west because there is a lot more stuff that can get deprecated. The unit testing that traditionally we don't see in patching, it's much brutal. And the reason that I think rigor and governance and need to fix that we have in operational security. We've been living with patching, with fixing things for quite a long time. And there is 2 or 3 framework like PCI DSS, SOC 2, and other framework that dictate how long you should fix certain things. So overall, as a security and operation, we're quite well used to the patch Thursday of Microsoft or when we release things. Now in AppSec, we don't have the equivalent. So it's like telling developer to actually change mentality, but in application security, we haven't had that mentality for almost never. And that's what's the funny part of actually, when I was chasing how operational security got used to certain things that are perfectly applicable to application security, but also how difficult it is to adopt the same concept because there is resistance from a developer world to adopt new things. As human, we don't like to change the way we operate. Also, on the other side, developers are not encouraged to fix stuff unless there is business buy-in. But the challenge is, how do we talk to the business about problems? Tanya, I think you have a fantastic stories about that.
I have a whole bunch of stories about that. I was thinking though, like whenever someone says, we'll just patch it, when they use the word just, to me, it means they don't necessarily understand the level of complexity. Like you were saying, like if it's a piece of software and it has a dependency, well, that dependency might have 8 other dependencies underneath that has 12 more underneath those. And it could be that you have to re-architect your entire application or rewrite certain parts or remove giant parts. And I think that the level of complexity it's not acknowledged when you say, oh yeah, just patch it, just fix it.
Just upgrade. Well, I think upgrading a library is probably, I will go on a limb, is probably the easier part. But then the challenge is you have the ripple effect of all the dependency. And the challenge as well is those dependency might be on a piece of code that has been built and nobody has even touched anymore. So nobody has knowledge about that piece of code, has a ripple effect that are hard to get. While in patching, we don't see that many effects like this because we get a package, we upgrade it, maybe the equivalent I can think is if a system is not maintained anymore, and you don't want to touch it, you leave it there because it works until it tumbles over. It kind of can't stay like that.
I agree. I want to take this brief moment to thank our sponsor, and our sponsor is Phoenix Security. And Frank, since you're actually on the show while you are the sponsor, can you say a blurb of Phoenix Security? Just like a couple sentences.
Yes, and I think our philosophy is to help the human aspect of application security. We are trying to help both aspect and both area from a developer perspective, from a security perspective, not getting burned out. And the way to do this is to select what's really matter, what are the vulnerabilities that really matters, by contextualizing vulnerability, looking at what software you run and where you run it. And as well, connecting to the third aspect, that is the business. So how do you translate all this very, very complex problem to the business, to a business persona, and go there and say, we have this risk profile, we have this potential impact. Can you let us focus for the next couple of sprints or for one sprint? You decide to get to this level that as an organization we agree. And creating that line of connection is really, really important for us for a single reason. We don't want security burnout, and we don't want people to fall out of this industry because it's really so hard to get into. And that was my why I started Phoenix Security. So as a tagline, we are contextual-based risk vulnerability management from code to cloud.
Ooh, that's a really good tech. I like that tagline. That is very attractive. But
Thank you.
speaking about that though, it leads me into, so one of the things you covered in your white paper that I was excited about was you talk, and this is a thing that I talk with constantly when I work with clients through IAN's research, the maturity level they want to meet. So like what security assurance level or security posture are you looking for? How do you approach that in the white paper, or how do you approach that in general?
Well, I think in general is more against whom you want to defend, like which threat do you want to defend. And in the white paper, we tackled that in risk level. What is the risk level you want to be at? That is not entirely considering the threat that you want to defend, because certain threat you'll be almost impossible to defend against. You want to defend at NSA level against nation states attacker. Yes, do you have nation states attacker budget to actually put 2 or 3, 4 compensating control, and then an operation team that react on a millisecond? Like, probably not. Probably you want to scale it down and probably defend your business against script kiddie. And who doesn't know the script kiddie are people that can just download things from the web and just launch an attack with Metaexploit or other tools. And those probably occasional attacks together with some targeted attacks is what most of the business will fit in, unless the national critical infrastructure, where in that case they might be targeted. And the other side is, okay, now you decide the risk level you want to be. How quickly do you want to recover from an attack? That I think is cybersecurity resiliency. So you get a ransomware. Do you have backup that you can restore? Or do you get a service knocked down? Or do you get a ransomware that leverage a vulnerability on a service that gets knocked down? Can you scale it? Can you swap it? How quickly can you do it? How quickly can you get back to operation? That are, I think, the same, two faces of the same coin. One to not get attacked, and the other one to recover very quickly. And sometimes as a business, we focus on one and we forget the other one.
I have worked at so many places where I say, well, what's our business continuity plan, or do we have a disaster recovery plan? Especially when working with governments, if something happens, what are we going to do? And I remember one of the directors saying, oh, well, I'll panic accordingly. And I was like, no, we need a plan. And he said, well, I'll just resign. And I was like, no, quite frankly, if I was your boss, I'd just fire you if that literally was your plan. Like, oh, I'll just abandon all hope. I'm like, no, there might be an emergency someday and we have to be ready for it. And when I worked in the government, I got to see disasters, and sometimes they went really well and I was really impressed. And Sometimes they didn't. Um, so when you're talking about it in your, I have so many questions about maturity level. Um, does the white paper give any, and for everyone that's listening, just to be clear, obviously in the show notes, we're going to have a link to the white paper. We're going to have a link to all the things that Frank talks about, because I don't want you to be left out. So if you're panicking and you're driving your car somewhere, you're like, oh no, where will I get the white paper? You'll get it. Don't worry. But in the white paper, how do you get them to decide the maturity level, or like how are there approaches for that, or is there any advice maybe that we could give our listeners?
Questions. I think we try to keep it simple, because you can have endless questionnaire, but then nobody replies. The question is, do you even do pen testing? Do you do code scanning? Do you assess any threat? Like 4 or 5 questions like this get you very quickly to a maturity stage where you don't have any maturity, and then you can even report to the board or to the rest of the business, we have X number of vulnerability, and that's perfectly fine. I think we're demonizing a lot reporting based on severity and vulnerability, and I'm faulty of that because I said we shall report based on risk. It depends, actually. It depends on the stage of your maturity level or your stage of the organization. So not because, if you get on the journey of risk, that is not that complicated, and we make it very complicated for some reason in security when it's actually not. But I'll talk about that later. I'll rant about that later. But there are maturity stages and maturity journey. Even if you ask, do you have an AppSec person? That could be a determination of where you are with the program or not in that particular case. Or do you do any threat assessment or threat modeling, any pen testing? Those are simple questions that you can answer. And if you reply yes to many of them, then probably you're a higher maturity level. I think we go up to maturity level 4, and then you get to the enlightenment that is maturity level higher than 4. We have a couple more levels. We started for 0 for some reason. We have 7 levels.
Some companies are at 0, Frank. I do meet with companies sometimes, and they have made 0 application security efforts so far. And some of the companies are larger companies where they have way more than 500 people, and they have 20, 30, 40 devs, and they literally have nothing. And so I like that you give them a place to go, because quite frankly, sometimes I'll start the call and the people seem nervous. It's like, I'm not here to judge you. If you're here, you want to make it better. So you and I are on the same page with that. So let's find out how we can go from 0 to 1, and then plan for 1 to 2, etc. I really like that you have a level for everyone, even if the level is welcome.
It's because we realize that we're very judgmental as a security, and sometimes we say we shall do this or you shall do that, without recognizing that even a small percentage of improvement is better than 10,000-mile journey. And 10,000-mile journey start with a single step, one in front of the others, and that's how you get the momentum. But also, I recognize that not all the teams are at the same maturity level. You might have teams that have a security champion or a DevSecOps person in the team, or somebody security minded, and some teams that have absolutely no clue where even to start. And that's why I really like the ending or the second part of the white paper where we talk about security OKR, and when you do risk level vulnerability management across application security or operational security, that's really powerful because each team can self-govern. You can define a strategy as a business saying, we want to be at this risk level. And then every team can self-govern and can decide, okay, maybe for 2 sprints, we're not going to deploy any security fix, any security patch, because we need a release in X amount of days. Otherwise, we might lose that market opportunity, whatever. But in that way, you compare security risk against operational risk, against business risk. And it's the same risk. We try to make it different, but it's actually the same risk. And business people are paid well and are well trained on actually evaluating risk. So if you communicate with a business owner about, this is your risk level, you are responsible, you are accountable for it, we help you going faster, is a totally, totally different topic and discussion rather than going there and saying, you have SLA, you need to fix all your critical vulnerability in 2 days. And by the way, the clock already started ticking 2 days ago.
Yeah,
Right?
that's not security that's going to work. It's not going to work. So there was another thing in your white paper. I know I'm asking 100 questions, but there's another thing that I liked where you talked about, I like the way you worded it. How can you empower a team to do their own governance and to be responsible for their own risk? And so I want to highlight enabling them rather than yelling at them or telling them how wrong they are or giving them a 100-page policy that makes no sense, but actually preparing them and giving them the knowledge and training they need so they can do that and actually be responsible for their own risk. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I told you even better a story because I lived through it. I lived the mental shift and the shift in the eyes of the business and the developer, how they look at security. So I've run multiple programs and fundamentally Phoenix and a lot of the things that I write is trying to distill a lot of this knowledge on what I learned, what I did wrong, and what I did good. And when we were reporting, of course, vulnerability by the numbers and pushing SLA because that was the policy, we had consistent fight and we don't have time and maybe prove me that this vulnerability is actually hackable and by whom. And then I had my security champion team spending 3 days trying to figure out if there is an exploit available, how bad it is. Let me do a proof of concept. It went back after 2 weeks to development and they didn't even remember having that conversation. Well, when we started empowering each team and saying, okay, we have measured that, by your code base, your library, based on where they run, you're currently at this risk level. And the organization has decided to be 10% below that risk level. So at your current rate of measurement, it'll take you, 10 days, 50 days to fix the amount of vulnerability we want you to fix. But having this insight, having looked at your code base or your vulnerability, you have, 50 cross-site scripting that you can solve, or 50 input validation issues that you can solve with a simple OS library that does input validation for you. And maybe there will be some exception, but in one upgrade or using this in the code, you can fix at scale 50 vulnerability, happy days, you can go back to doing your job. All of a sudden, they start welcoming us in every sprint planning, because we were helping them hitting their own goals faster. Because all of a sudden, we had the steerco that was saying, the steering committee around vulnerability management that was setting risk target for each line of business. And then those cascaded to each business owner. And as a product owner, you start saying your developer, this is one of the scorecard, one of the things that we're going to get measured against. All of a sudden, it wasn't security dictating things or specific stuff. It was empowering them to decide what to do, when to do it, and then maybe raising an exception. And an exception was risk against risk. So it was a much more flexible and fluid way to treat security risk in the way it should be. And then us as a security champion team was coming in there as a hero to help them achieving faster and getting their goal faster. So they were welcoming us. Instead of 6 months before, they were fighting us to death. And it was a total shift. My security champion team I had a word, ikigai. They regained their passion to actually doing security. They were helping people getting better, not bashing them on the head to say, you're an idiot, and sorry for the word, you need to fix vulnerabilities because they're bad. They were actually helping them achieving their objective faster and in a smart way. It was a dramatic change.
I love that. So there's so few happy security stories.
I know, right?
Maybe I should add that as a feature to the podcast. Like, tell me a happy security story where something good happened and you were like, that was awesome. I love this. I really like the positivity. And I like how in the white paper, it's, we can do this. Like, here's things we've done. When?
There is a way. And actually, by the way, I have that rules in my podcast to actually close on a positive message. It's the rule for every guest to close on a positive note, because security is hard and it can be mentally draining. It can lead to burnout. I've seen tons of burnout in my teams, and it's painful. It's because I think we have lack of communication and we do things over and over
Mhm.
without thinking on how to make them better, because we have so much work to do. And sometimes we're too busy rolling a square stone without thinking, well, maybe let's hold on a second, maybe let's make it round and let's work in a smart way. But that requires two things. That requires stopping for a second, it is scary, and business support to actually say, let's stop doing the things that we were doing yesterday and let's do something new and something innovative and something more clever. It's hard.
No, but it's. I hope that our listeners and our viewers are like, yeah, happy story where it worked. We can do this. So I am supposed to wrap up with you now. So there was a surprise that you have for OWASP members.
Yes.
Can you tell us?
So we actually release in January now this month the version 3 of the platform, and we have a historic collaboration with OWASP, because we are where we are with the platform because of all the help of all the OWASP members. We want to give an extended license to them to actually test fully the full-fledged platform with unlimited resources. So we're gonna reach out to all of them with their freebies to actually use the platform and get the ball rolling with their application security program. Even if they don't have any security tool, we offer them the ability to actually plug in their cloud, in their GitHub, doing web assessment and web data assessment with our orchestrated app. So we give even a startup that doesn't have any security knowledge or any security tool the ability to actually get going with this methodology and enterprise resource at zero cost, because we want everybody to be a little bit better off from an AppSec perspective and be a little bit happier to do AppSec.
So anyone that has followed me at all knows I love OWASP. I'm such a huge fan. So if you are an OWASP member, you take note. And also you get a license, I believe, to secure the flag. And there's a couple of other things too now. So it used to be you became a member and you got literally nothing, except you could say, I'm a member, and then you have $50 less. But now, or if you're me and you're a lifetime member, you have $500 less. But now you get things for being a member. And so, Andrew Vanderstock, if you're listening, everyone become an OWASP member.
I think you get roughly $50,000 or $70,000 worth of freebie right now.
Whoa.
For 50 quid.
Yeah. Not bad. So for people who don't know what OWASP is, it's the Open Web Application Security Project. It is a gigantic community online. There's an international nonprofit foundation, and they organize a bunch of stuff like OWASP AppSec, which is happening next month in Dublin, and I'm one of the keynotes, and I'm ridiculously excited. They also have chapters all over the planet, including in Victoria, BC, where I live, in Ottawa, where Frank lives, in the London, UK. In London, UK, not the London, UK, and over 300 places around the world. We have open source projects like Defect Dojo, and they do awesome stuff. And if you haven't heard of OWASP, I suggest you go to owasp.org and check it out right after you visit our sponsor, Phoenix Security. And with that,
Phoenix Security is actually easy. It's super easy. We made it.
.security. And Frank, is there anything else that you want to promote or share or talk about before I wrap up?
Yeah, we wrote other white paper. You actually contribute to the early book where we describe a few things about how to get AppSec program going. And we wrote another couple of books on contextual vulnerability management. So how to translate fundamentally a lot of this vulnerability with context and how that gets you better off at prioritizing things. And what are the regulation frameworks that you can use, leverage to actually push your vulnerability management program to the next step. And I rant a lot about AppSec. So if you're not sick of AppSec, I have also a podcast running that is called the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast, a mouthful, or CSCP, that is available everywhere, or CSCP, or cybercloudpodcast.com. You can find us.
Awesome. This is fantastic. Listeners, I'm going to have a link to everything Frank said, so you don't have to go try to search the internet for it and find random things that aren't as good. Thank you so much to our sponsor, Phoenix Security, and Frank. Thank you, dear listener and viewer. I really, really appreciate the support you give We Hack Purple. And with that, we will see you next time. Let's say bye, Frank.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.